Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati, New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebreed in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for the truth, good communication is key. Now, the phone lines are open for questions or stories. The number to call is 661-244-9831. Make sure you press the number 1 to get into the queue. We'll try to get to you as soon as we can. Otherwise, our chat room is open so that you can post any comments or questions there as well. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, and full show uploads. And if you have specific comments, questions, or you'd like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormalreviewradio at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your mind. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
Well, as a professional writer since 1978, Loren W. Christensen has penned 50 published books with 5 publishers, dozens of magazine articles, and edited a police newspaper for nearly 8 years. He has written on the martial arts, missing children, street gangs, school shootings, workplace violence, riots, police-involved shootings, nutrition, exercise, prostitution, and various street subcultures. Mr. Christensen began training in the martial arts in 1965 and continues to this day. Over the years, he has earned a total of 11 black belts, 8 in karate, 2 in jujitsu, and 1 in arnis. As a result of his tour in Vietnam and nearly 3 decades in law enforcement, Mr. Christensen's focus in the martial arts, writing, teaching, and training has always been on street survival, not competition. He has starred in 7 martial arts training videos as well. In August of 2011, Mr. Christensen was inducted into the Martial Arts Masters Hall of Fame in Anaheim, California, receiving the Golden Life Achievement Award. Mr. Christensen's newest book, Cops, True Stories of the Paranormal, Ghosts, UFOs, and Other Shivers, reveals some of the most amazing paranormal stories straight from the men and women of uniform. Stories from prison, hospitals, and men vanishing in thin air right in front of an officer are just a few that can be read about. Be prepared to hear about those stories and others that will definitely give you shivers. Please help me in welcoming Loren Christensen to the show. Hey, Loren, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Hi, Anthony. Hi, Lucy. Nice to be here.
Hey, Loren. Thank you so much for joining us. You know what? As I mentioned before, I have to say I couldn't put this book down. I enjoyed reading it so much. You know, you've had a long career in law enforcement. You're a Vietnam vet. You have 11 black belts. You're a brilliant writer. Your books cover a range of subjects, both fiction and nonfiction, including martial arts and self-defense. So when you look at this list, there's this one title that's completely different from the others, Cops, True Stories of the Paranormal. How did you come about to write this book?
Well, it's just something that's been of interest to me for a lot of years. I think a lot of people are interested in the topic, hence the radio show you have here. About 5 or 6 years ago, my book agent was working on a deal where I would write a book on Ghost Hunters, a TV show, and the deal fell through. But before it fell through, my wife and I said, "Well, we better try to figure out what we're supposed to be doing here if I'm going to write a book on it." So we started reading a lot of books, watching a lot of videos and DVDs and YouTube and that sort of thing. We got a digital camera and we got a good recorder, and then we started to do a little prowling around our own, not knowing what we were doing. And we started in what seemed to us to be the most logical place, and that was in a cemetery. As I say in the book, they asked Willie Sutton, the most famous bank robber in the world, why he robbed so many banks. He says that's because that's where the money is. We figured, well, let's go to where the dead people are. And that's how we got our start. And we had a couple of experiences. And before it was all over, the book deal fell through. Never happened. But we kept up our interest. And this was just a kind of a nagging idea I had for a long time. And I put it into action about 6 months ago, and hence the book today.
Well, you know what? Being an author of a book on the paranormal doesn't necessarily mean that the author is a believer. So what is your stance on the paranormal, and are there any areas that you may believe in more than others?
I think I believe in all of it. I haven't had experiences in all of it, but I've had some pretty bizarre experiences, and I can kind of empathize with people who have had experiences and run up against criticism, and I think there's no tougher audience than police officers, and that's why I wanted to kind of focus on that market of people who are sort of black and white, meat and potatoes, as the sayings go, and it takes a lot to shock police officers who have been around. And if you're a big city officer, you've had a lot of experience, and within a couple of months on the job, you've seen more things than the average person sees in their lifetime. And then to run into something that can't be explained by rational conversation, it leaves one wondering, what was that? Why am I afraid? Why am I scared of this? And I have no explanation for it. So that's why I went after that particular that particular group of people to put an input into this book. If they believe it, then I believe it, because my life has depended on other police officers for many, many years.
Well, that leads me to my next question. I mean, does a paranormal story from a person in law enforcement make it more believable if the story was from someone who worked at McDonald's or someone who had a less strict code of work ethic?
Probably not. I think what attracted me to the idea is just the fact that officers see an awful lot on the job. They see every variation of man's inhumanity to man, and everything kind of fits into a pattern. If they work in a drug case, it's a certain pattern. The players are different, maybe the dope is different, but it fits a pattern. The same thing with a homicide or with a rape or with a burglary or an armed robbery, etc. It's when something doesn't fit in a pattern, and these people who have a vast experience in all kinds of things on the job, that's what interested me, was to get it from people who would normally poo-poo something until it happened to them, and to find officers who are willing to tell their story.
Well, Loren, we've talked to another author, Frank Mara, and he's a retired NYPD officer, and he wrote about 9/11 and about the Staten Island grounds where the Trade Center was brought to for sifting and going through before it went forward. And he was amazed at how many officers came forward to talk to him about their experience, and particularly the experience that they had at this debris field in Staten Island, where there was a woman, female worker at Salvation Army of some sort, and it was a spirit that had come through. And he was amazed at how many officers came forward speak to him about it because he wasn't expecting that from a fellow officer. How did the stories in your book come to be revealed to you? Did you find it difficult to have people come forward to you, or to have them reveal the stories to you?
Well, I thought it would. I thought it would have problems because I've written a couple of books that. One book in particular is our bestseller. I co-authored it with an Army colonel. It's called On Combat, and the book it's required reading at the Army War College and various police agencies around the world. And so, would I ruin my reputation by seeking stories out in the police community? So I was kind of worried about that, and so I went to a couple of police Facebook sites. I put out the idea. Waiting to get criticized, and ran out of town, and just the opposite happened. People started contacting me right away. In fact, the very first day I put a feeler out on a police site, I got contacted by a top police trainer in the world, mostly in the United States, but he travels abroad too in training, and he sent me a story that day, and his story is hate. The ghosts are called hate, and the Texas term for ghost. And then I just started getting stories, and people would tell other officers. Some officers would tell other officers, and I started getting all kinds of a response from it. And there's only a couple of people I knew had stories, and I asked them, and they got back to me later and said, I tried to write this story 2 or 3 times. It bothers me too much. I'm still having trouble dealing with the experience, and I never did find out what the experience was. I was really, you got to tell me now. But they wouldn't write the story for the book. But other people came forward. I never asked the officers why they wanted to tell their story. Some were a little reluctant, but once they got going, they go, this is great. And a couple of people even contacted me and said, what would happen is the officer would write the story, give it to me, and then I would kind of reformat it in the format I wanted for the book, and edit it and put it in their readable shape. And they said that after I had done that, first time they really saw the story for what it was, and it really helped them kind of come to terms with their experience, and that was a great thing to hear.
Yeah, I found that a lot. We've talked to others in your field, in your area and expertise, and also have written books on the paranormal, and they've said the same thing. Also, too, that it was amazing to find, folks, who don't necessarily, you would think, have those experiences, number one, but have the ability or the willingness to come forward and share that with fellow police officers or even with the public at all. And that amazed me to hear that, from a previous guest that we had, and now from you as well.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised. I figured, well, if I got 2 or 3 stories, I just put it into a blog. I write a blog occasionally for a publisher called Paladin Press, and I would just put it in the blog. But then very soon I had 10, 12, 15, 17 stories, and that encouraged me to include some of my stories, which I'd written a lot about my experiences in the military and in the martial art community and police work, but I've never written about my experiences with the paranormal and with UFOs. And so this was the first time, and I was a little nervous, especially the UFO story. I was a little nervous about telling that. I told friends, and but I've never put it in I never published the story before. So, so their courage gave me courage to do the same. So.
That's great. There's a level of belief that a person in law enforcement, and you sort of touched on this before, that they must have, and it relies heavily on evidence, true hard evidence. That's the basic background, from my belief, being an outsider, of what the law enforcement relies heavily on. And the stories in your book are technically, in our world and in your book, technically it's hard to supply evidence for, and yet they still made the witnesses think paranormal. Have you found that there is a fine line between what science tells us and what maybe the universe and the other side are trying to actually share with us?
Wow, great question. I'm not sure how to answer that. In all the cases that the officer told about, I don't know how far they went in their particular police agency talking about what they experienced. I think there's about four of the stories, they wanted their names changed and their agency not given because they're still on the job and they didn't want to catch any heat for it. So in some cases they didn't tell anyone. In one of my stories, Cups and Coffee, the story, we just wrote the story as a burglary. We didn't tell about the extra things, the paranormal aspects of it. We figured you'd get laughed out of the bureau. Like you say, the police department depends. It's all about the evidence. They used to say that in CSI all the time. The evidence doesn't lie. Well, in these particular cases, you don't always have tangible evidence other than what you saw. You saw something happen, and then it's no longer happening. That evidence the visual evidence is no longer there. So it's pretty hard to prove, and so it makes it very difficult. In several of the stories in here, they were told, the officers were told not to tell anyone, and years later they are telling it now. And some of the guys that told the stories who were told not to tell anyone are now retired and feel free to do so. So the same with my UFO stories.
Well, we're talking about your book, Hopp's True Stories of the Paranormal, Ghosts, UFOs, and Other Shivers. And you spoke about many different levels of men and women in uniform, police officers, sheriffs, SWAT members, correction officers, and MPs. Did you find the level of experience or reactions different amongst the different levels of uniform?
No. I think there's one or two stories. I'm drawing a blank on the titles now. There's so many titles, but I think it was called The Touch, where the officer her hand was touched, and another's Eyes. The story called Eyes. Those were virtually brand new officers. They were just starting to work by themselves, and their stories were no different than guys who'd been on for. One guy had been on for 20 years and is a Navy commander in the reserves, or retired, and their stories were no different. They didn't tell them any differently. They were no more over the top or underplayed. They're all the same.
Okay.
Well, you know what, Loren? The job of law enforcement, it's a difficult job. It's very difficult. And the public tends to forget that an officer, you're just like everyone else. You've got family, you've got friends, the same hopes and dreams like everyone else. And I do know that seeing so much while working can change a person's attitude. And there's a line in your book that reads, and I quote, "Even rookies quickly understand the two primary rules in law enforcement. Rule number 1, everyone lies. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. Law enforcement people trust the evidence." Now, with this mindset, did it make it difficult to believe the stories that you wrote about?
No. I looked to see if anyone was going to. First of all, some of these officers, it took them quite a while to write these stories. I'd get an email and say, I'm going to. The only one that didn't was the very first one I got, because he had already written it. And he had thought about publishing it himself, and so he sent it to me that same day. I put up the feeler. No, I look for that, and I think I'm pretty good at. As a guy who's been writing for 30-some years and editing other people's things for 20-some years, I think I have a pretty good eye to tell when something's not true, or if you're going to tell a lie, I think you tell a little more fantastic lie than the stories in here. But these were. I also communicated with these guys, and a lot of them were really shook by their story. And they talked about how they had trouble getting those words down, and how remembering those experiences made them sweat all over again, or could be covered with goosebumps, that sort of thing. And no, I looked for that, and I did not see any evidence of that whatsoever.
Well, the book is loaded with different stories on the paranormal, and they've got titles like Hospital Morgue, Dead Man Walking, Ghost Prisoner. Now, out of all the stories in the book, which was your favorite to write and why?
Well, my UFO story, that's the one I wrote, was my favorite to write, because it made me organize my thoughts on it. I put word out about this show, so I don't want to point at one particular article. I think the thing that surprised me the most was there were 3 or 4 stories about people vanishing. You mentioned that in the intro, and that is something that had never occurred to me before. We have bad guys get away from us. That's not the same. But
right.
having somebody vanish, in a couple of cases, well, in one case, the officers could reach out and just about touch him when he disappeared. And in the other case, he was the distance of the driver's seat to the front fender. That's pretty close to have someone just disappear like that. So those stories really shocked me. And the first time I saw that story, I go, yeah, okay. And then another one. Then I found some news items. At the end of each section, the patrol section, the haunted places section, divine intervention section, the UFO section, I have X number of news stories. I just dug up out of. I didn't go to any blogs. I didn't want any blog stories. I wanted hardcore news stations that had done news stories on experiences that police officers had, and I found a couple of stories there where people had disappeared right in front of the officers. It kind of makes you wonder if how many people you walk by during the day are not really there if you were to look back.
Right. We have actually a question from the chat room that we have from Liz29, and she was talking about psychic detectives. Have you ever worked with psychic detectives, and how well was that experience received?
I personally worked with. I didn't work with. She called me. We had a real brutal racist. I worked in the street gangs for about 4 years, and my specialty in the street gangs were white supremacist crimes, skinheads, and that sort of thing. And we had a real violent homicide in Portland where skinheads beat an Ethiopian man to death with a baseball bat. And a few years later, there was the big trial, and it was just a zoo of a trial. People came from all over the world to this trial. And I get calls from everybody, and one call was from a medium of sorts, and frankly, I don't remember the topic of the conversation, but she was giving me some information that what she saw. She's a psychic. I'm saying not a medium, but a psychic. But she saw this big thing happening at the trial, some big explosion, or there'd be hundreds of people hurt and killed, and that sort of thing, and it didn't happen. But that was the only one I talked to. I know I've had officers tell me in other agencies that they have worked with them, and I don't recall any details of it, but they had worked with them to some degree.
Are they widely used in the field?
I just don't know. They're going to have to prove their work. It's sort of like what we call a CI, a confidential informant. Somebody just comes up and gives you some information about this house down here is doing something. You have to prove your reliability. And we tested a confidential informant they have to give us certain 2 to 4 things that turn out to be reliable. Then we can decide whether or not we want to pay them or we want to use them or we can count on them at court, that sort of thing. So it'd be the same thing with a psychic. They're going to have to prove their skills before they're going to spend any time on it, on an individual like that. But just because I don't know doesn't mean it's not happening. I just don't know.
Right. There's an interesting section in your book where it talks about how, and I may get this wrong, so please forgive me, how women should not give birth to their children in hospitals. It's basically a hospital is a place where the sick and the elderly go to die. The place sort of should be purified before a newborn enters into the world and into this hospital. And it sort of made me think and wonder a bit. Do you believe that there is some attachment or remains of a person once they've crossed over that lingers around in a place that could possibly affect the living and especially a newborn?
Well, in the book, what I did, I have a terminology page, and I couldn't find too many paranormal type sites that could agree on terminology, and so I chose the ones that we use the most. And the way I define ghosts in this were an energy that remains, and you can't communicate with it. It just it's burned into the time zone or whatever. It's something happened in this place. You know what I'm talking about. And the opposite is spirits, where a spirit has come back from the other side to communicate for whatever reason. So, I think you see that. In fact, the ghost definition is something I think we see, at least in my experience, just watching the shows and talking to people and the stories that's in this book. And these are that's the most common type of sighting. These recordings that have been, if you read, I remember reading years ago where people around the turn of the last century would go to Gettysburg and stand down by the fences where the Great Gettysburg Battle took place, and they could hear the screaming horses and the cannon fire and the men shouting and dying and that sort of thing. And that sort of dissipated after a number of years. And so the turn of the century would have been, I think Gettysburg was like 1863 or so. So that would have been like 40-some years later. It's slowly dissipated. And I think there's either I commented, I can't remember, or somebody commented that energy that remains in a location of great trauma, it doesn't last. Or if it might last anywhere from a week, it might last for a long period. What's a long period? I don't know, 2 or 3, 4 years. It goes away, but it can come back again. And if I recall reading this article, and it was years ago, that the sounds that people could hear of the Gettysburg Battle slowly dissipated as we entered the 1900s, 1905, 1908, whatever. So slowly dissipated. I may be
almost like a residual, almost like a residual energy just lingering and fading out.
Right. There's a local. I remember talking to a news reporter one time here in Portland, and she just mentioned she and her husband bought an old house. She had no idea who the former owner was. First night, she went down to cook a breakfast for she and her husband, and she walked in the kitchen, and there's a woman in there, an elderly woman, apron, baking something, covered with flour. Scared the crap out of her. She backed out of there and got her husband, came down, no longer there. Found out later that this woman lived there for many, many years, and she was a baker, always baking things for people in the neighborhood and that sort of thing. I think so. That would be an example of a residual energy, and or like there's some of the stories in the prisons here where they hear, or in the jails where they hear people shouting and the clanging and cells. Long closed prisons and long closed jails, they hear these sounds that are very typical of a prison. I think that would be another example also.
Well,
it doesn't scare you when you hear it, but
right. Well, after writing this book, did it stir anything different in you? Did it start making you think differently about the paranormal in any way?
Maybe a little bit. I kind of leaned to maybe not being quite so fearful if I experience something that it's either a residual energy, like we just talked about, or it's a spirit trying to communicate in some way. Of course, there's that whole other thing about the evil spirits or the demons. We have this officer here who was scratched several times. There's that sort of thing, but as far as just spirits and ghosts go, I think I became maybe a little bit less afraid of that. Now, if something jumped out, I don't know what I'd do. I'd probably scream like a little 12-year-old girl,
We'd all do that.
Well, Loren, you just talked about this. Because of some of the things that we humans do to each other, it's very easy to believe in evil. And based on your experiences both on the job and off the job, do you believe in any kind of evil forces?
Well, a story I didn't put in because I think that's too iffy. I interviewed a guy in jail who was a white supremacist, and he was in jail because he started a fire in a McDonald's on the table. He put a big pile of napkins and started a fire because he was mad because there was a black man sweeping the floor near him. really upset him. And so I went into, I'd always try, whenever one white supremacist got arrested, I'd try to interview them just to learn more about them, and then find out if I could get any additional information that would help, nabbing somebody else. But when you interview, in our jail, there's a plexiglass. It must be 3 or 4 inches thick, and he's on one side, and I was on the other side. And I've interviewed a lot of people, a lot of killers, really sadistical kind of people. This guy set a fire with napkins. This guy emanated such evil. I've told this story to people, and I've told my wife about it a few times. And this guy just emanated. I could feel it through this plexiglass. I could see it in his eyes, his posture. It wasn't like he wasn't a tight tattooed guy or a buff guy. Any of these things you kind of relate to that. Didn't look like an MMA guy. He's probably 145 pounds and kind of a little weasel, but he just had this almost satanic confidence, for lack of a better term. It's very evil, comfortable place where he was in his head. And he couldn't have been more than 24, 25 years old. But that guy has always remained in my head. There's a story I mentioned, the eyes. That officer is a Vietnam veteran, long-time SWAT officer, involved in a lot of stuff. And his story, Eyes, has stuck with him, because the way this dead man and this dog that ate part of the dead man looked at him and seemed to follow him around this room in a way that the dog would not take his eyes on, as if he said it's as if he was looking into his soul. Those kind of things, there's nothing there tangible there. The dog wasn't attacked. He was a big dog. He's an Irish wolfhound. This thing's a monstrous, but he wasn't straining at the end of a leash. My guy wasn't punching that plexiglass. But there's something there, something not tangible, but something that you feel it all the way through, and it sticks in your memory. That guy comes to mind over all the guys that have arrested for all kinds of horrendous things.
Wow. And I do remember that story about the dog. That was pretty freaky.
Yeah.
But you mentioned in the book, okay, sometimes to tell others, sometimes people don't say anything about the paranormal because it might bring teasing and ridicule. And we recently talked to filmmaker Seth Breedlove about his film, The White Owl Monster. Now, the law enforcement officers in this case, they actually witnessed a Bigfoot-like creature. And they were very hesitant to report what they saw and pretty much were told not to say anything. So with the amount of paranormal occurrences that seem to be increasing daily, is this subject ever addressed by the higher-ups?
Well, I've been away from the PD for quite a while, but I would just take a guess and say, no, it's not addressed, unless you had a command personnel that was a real strong believer in it. And even then, it would probably be a hushed conversation that maybe you heard an officer had a strange call. He'd call him into his office, or they'd run into each other in the hall. It would be a hushed conversation where they stop talking when others walk by, that sort of thing. I think law enforcement is a long way from this being sort of an acceptable thing. Because as I said, the officers are quick. Those who have not had an experience are quick to criticize those who have, and so most officers have been on for a while. They know that, and so they're just not going to say anything. Like the one story in Vanished, the very first story in the book, they were told not to even put that in the report, that this guy vanished. In my story, UFOs, the command personnel that came out from the Air Force said we were not to write home about it, not to call home about it, what happened. And so they at least in my experience, I don't see that happening for a while.
Right. Well, we talked a little bit earlier about belief and the levels of belief, and what sort of what job you have or what kind of person you have, and whether or not one is believable more than the other. But I wanted to touch on the stories itself. And there's a difference between believing something unexplained happened and believing something paranormal happened. The latter has more of a conviction, more of a belief than the other. Do the officers in your book and the men and women in uniform in your book, do they truly believe they experienced something paranormal, or do they stick to the idea that maybe something unexplained happened?
I didn't have that conversation with them, but it was my take on why they were writing the story. And I told them that I was writing the story. I hadn't got a title yet, but I was writing a story on cops' experiences with the paranormal, supernatural, UFOs, that sort of thing. And so it was those officers that saw that are the ones who contacted me and said, I have a story, and they give me a paragraph on it. And I said, great, write it up, send it in. And if you read the stories in there, I think most, if not all, thought their experience was something that was beyond the normal, that was paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
Not just something that couldn't be explained. I don't think they would even tell a story if they just thought it was something that couldn't be explained in a normal way. I mean, it was, but they went that additional step to believing that it was a paranormal experience.
Well, there's no doubt that times have changed, in the last 20 years. And Lucy had mentioned this before. More and more people are coming forward and talking about the stories, whatever line of job you have and however old you are. It seems as though more and more are coming forward now in the last 20 years, as opposed to how it was sort of, 50, 60 years ago when people wouldn't even dare say a thing that they saw a ghost. In writing this book and in your own experiences and such, have you ever had a theory or a thought as to why there's a shift, why there's a change all of a sudden?
With these officers willing to come forward?
Yeah, officers, but I think also to just human beings in general, just coming forward and wanting to talk about it, wanting to share their experiences.
Well, it could very well be that, and you'd probably know this more than I would, it could be that there are more experiences happening, more events happening. Could be because there's so many shows, so many TV programs on the subject, In fact, I just ran across a channel a couple of days ago, and I think half the day it's on the paranormal. And some of it was pretty good. I watched bits and pieces here and there, and I thought some of it was pretty good. I think some of the shows where they have B actors telling their story, and they're usually so ridiculously over the top.
Yeah.
If you watch the ghost hunter shows, and they never have experiences like that, but these B actors who are trying to get some attention, have all kinds of bizarre stuff,
Yes.
So I don't put my faith in that, but there just seemed to be a lot more. And when I was kicking around the idea of a title, I kind of went on in Amazon to see what titles were out there, and it just seemed like there's lots and lots and lots of books on the topic. I didn't realize it when I first started this. Usually when I write a book, I look for a void in the genre. I guess I kind of did because there's not too many about police officers, but I was surprised the large number that are out there. One thing, and Lucy's question about are officers more, I can't remember which house you have, are officers more likely to come forward now? I've been gone from the PD. I retired in 1997, so I'm an old timer, and my partners during from 1972 to 1997, it's a whole different breed that's there now. And it could be the new breed that's there may be more open to that. It's kind of a different culture. It's a different type of officers they're hiring nowadays. And it could be they are more open to speak out. It'd be interesting to see what happens as time goes by. I did notice that there seems to be some websites devoted to police stories. I made a point of not looking at those because I didn't want to be tainted by anything. And a couple of books. And then I think I don't know what, there's something about paranormal cops or the TV shows. I've never seen it, but I don't know if they're really cops or not. But so it's very possible that the newer officers might be more willing to come forward. I don't know. You know? But the grizzled guys that I worked with, no, they wouldn't come forward, except for the handful that have been retired for a while that told their stories in this book.
It could also be maybe, you know, it's just the time, the way that cultures and society has sort of adapted and changed. And, you know, yeah, I do agree with you. I definitely think, you know, television and media has sort of brought it more to the forefront and it's exposed it more. But I think it's the way, and I think you just mentioned this, the way that people are being brought up nowadays as opposed to, you know, in mid and early 1900s that, you know, there's taught, I guess, more to be more expressive and to open up more. And I guess that you know, that covers all of genres, not just the paranormal. It just covers everything. And that may be the reason as well, too.
Yeah, it could be. You know, everybody's kind of just expressing themselves better. And maybe they're just not fearful. They're not fearful. They're not. They don't think they're going to get any kind of criticism. Like I said, I expected it, and I haven't gotten it. There's a couple of guys that made a couple of smart remarks. You know, when I posted on Facebook on my page and on a couple of other pages, I just deleted them.
Yeah, it's the trolls. Yeah.
So, but yeah, I expected that. I expected a lot of that. You know, and but I didn't get it. And I think I mentioned in the book, there seemed to be, my sense was that this was an outlet for these guys to finally tell their story. And that's the way I saw it when I decided to tell mine in this same book. I wasn't sure if I was going to tell mine or not. And I just felt, but maybe I felt a little braver to tell mine as well. So.
Well, Loren, if you had never told your story, would it be something that would have bothered you if you never talked about it or revealed it?
You know, I've never told too many people about. I have like 2-3 paranormal stories and ghosts, that kind of thing, or whatever they were. And then I had the UFO story. I keep coming back to that, but I don't think I would have had any problems if I hadn't told the other stories. But the UFO story, I might have. I've been wanting to tell that forever. And I've told a few friends, and I've made a friend of the guy who's the chief of police down in Florida, and I told him my story and asked him, "Have you seen anything like this down there?" And he said no, he hadn't. So I might have been bothered. I think that was a little story that's been itching. That where would I put it? I wouldn't put it in a martial art book. I wouldn't put it in a book helping people deal with PTSD. You've written a lot about that, you know. So, so this was the perfect outlet for it. So. I'd love to do something on the 911 side. I've often wondered if there's been, you know, any experiences there, and I've been there several times and felt the overwhelming weight of the place, but I've never heard of anything going on there. So.
Trust me, I know there's something there. I felt it. I felt it. But, God, did I. But one of the stories in the book, talking about fears and scary stories, the one about Tower 7 in Berlin, this one gave me chills. And the tagline of your book is Ghosts, UFOs, and Other Shivers. And you mentioned the story about the dog. Is there any other stories that you heard that were told to you that gave you shivers?
The faceless mannequin, and the reason that did, I have a martial arts school, and that guy is a student, and he's a veteran in Afghanistan, and he's a campus cop. And this story happened on the campus. And just, you want me to tell it very briefly?
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. This is a sprawling campus here. You want to name the campus in Oregon. He found out later that it was built on a pioneer cemetery from the 1800s, and it has a theater building. And he has a kind of a creepy paranoia about theater buildings. Anyway, he said there's something unnatural about theater buildings. And just for the heck of it, I ran haunted theaters and Google and found tons of them. So maybe he has something there. But This particular building, he's had some minor experiences in before, going in and felt cold spots, that feeling of being watched, the whole creepy GBs, all that whole business. But one time he went in, and there was a room he had never been in. And he said, I'm going to go and check this room out. He fumbled around, found the key that fit the padlock, went inside the room, and it turns out it's a storage room. Light doesn't work. Flashing his flashlight around in the room, and he sees a mannequin. And it's like a Macy's mannequin, except it has no face. It's just a flat, featureless face. It's looking off to its right. And he shines his flashlight on it, and the thing slowly started to turn toward him. Excuse me. He kind of did a little belchy scream and backpedaled, did a moonwalk out of the place, trying to catch his breath. And he goes, "What did I see?" And he said, I talked myself into this, because I'm kind of spooky. I'm in theaters and stuff. And he said, "No, I'm going to go back in." And he gets his cell phone out and turns it on. And in the image, you can see in the video, you can see the hallway. You can see pictures on the wall of past actors. And then he proceeds back into the room. It's dark. You see the flashlight moving around. And then it finds the mannequin, and very slowly the mannequin turns toward the camera, and he backs out again. That one spooked me because he brought the tape one time and showed me the tape. In fact, I have it. I think I have it in my collection here. And it is really, really creepy. No one goes in this room. No one's been in there for a long, long time. I don't know if there's not even, it seemed like there was no power in there. He said there's no lights. It was just an old storage room. He backed out, locked it up. He didn't go back in for a long time. What's a long time? I don't know, several weeks, several months. Finally went back in, and the mannequin was no longer there. And he says, I kind of assumed it just walked away on its own someplace, But that one was kind of creepy because I saw the footage. And it's really, part of it is, it's almost like the, what's those shows? There's a series of the spooky shows. There's no music. It's just the images, the lost footage, one of those early lost footage shows. And it's very much like that. And then they have this thing slowly turn this faceless head toward you in this light beam that's just from the flashlight, which is very creepy. And I'll send it to you. I'll send it to Lucy if you want.
I really
I'll have to
want
ask
to see
him
this.
first if I can do that. Yeah,
I want to see this.
I'll make
that
sure
sounds really
okay.
interesting. There's a whole bunch of people in the chat room now saying how much they would love to see that tape. But that is a freaky. He should.
Yeah, I'll have to ask him because he.
Of course.
Well, yeah, if it's okay with he and with him and his agency.
Yeah, of course. You actually touched on this a little bit, trolls who sort of remarked back when you posted in preparation for the book. What do you say to people who don't believe what we've all experienced and that they don't believe in the idea of spirits and communication and UFOs and all of that? What do you say to people?
Well, you don't believe until you have your own experience,
Right.
There's I tell a story about a guy named Jim Pace, and I hope I'm telling his name right. Just an investigation he did in a haunted jail. And he runs the Sooner Paranormal Investigations in Oklahoma. And he said the difference between a believer and an unbeliever is the believers had an experience. It's as simple as that. And he took a non-believer reporter with him on the first night they investigated, I think it was the jail. And that guy ended up being one of his partners and worked with him for about 3/4 of a year. He and his wife both, until they had to move or something, and they had to leave. But he said did some outstanding work. But here's a guy who's a non-believer ended up being an investigator. It's the same with the UFOs. People aren't a believer until they have an experience.
That's true.
The same thing with police work. People don't know what fear is until, why does a cop do that? And they don't know unless they've been in that kind of an experience to know how they're going to act, how they're going to react. So,
yeah, very true.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do reveal in the book that you're not an investigator of the paranormal or the supernatural, but would you consider exploring more about the paranormal, either for a book or personally?
Oh yeah, I'd love to. Like I say, my wife and I got some equipment, and we did a little bit. We did a little bit in a mausoleum, and in actually 2 mausoleums, and we took some ghost tours. And one in particular is Victoria. Canada, the ghost tour up there is really good. And I remember at one point whispering to my wife, I said, "My kung fu is useless here." It was really a spooky place, and it's a great tour. And even if you don't see anything, some of these, like San Francisco, Haight-Ashbury is a good tour. The Queen Mary is a very good tour. But yeah, we went to a mausoleum very briefly. There's a giant mausoleum here. It's about 3 or 4 stories above ground, another 3 or 4 stories down or underground, and it's built on the side of a hill. It's just monstrous, and it's all coffins within drawers and lots and lots of urns of ashes. By lots and lots, I mean tens of thousands, and everything's marble and silent. And we went there just to kind of to see what's up. We took our little recorders and we snapped a lot of pictures and we see if we could get some orbs and that sort of thing. And we didn't know what we were doing. And we spent about 3 hours at a time just screamed by, and we left. And we thought it was so cool, we went back out the next weekend. And we were only there about an hour, and we had a thing to do that night, a concert I think we had to go to. And we both started feeling really, really strange. And by the time we got to the car, my wife was so absolutely exhausted she couldn't move. I think she even fell asleep on the way home. And I was just in a rage. Nothing, she wasn't tired of anything we had done. I wasn't mad at anything I'd experienced. But I was just so angry. And all the way home, I kept thinking, I'm just going to pull somebody out of the car and just beat them to a pulp. Make me feel a little better. And we got home. It's about a 40-minute drive, sat in our driveway, and we go, did we pick something up there? And because I've been around. I'm 69 years old. I've been around for a little while, and I've never experienced anything like that, even on the police job. But she'd never experienced anything like that. And we didn't want to go in a house. If we brought something with us, we didn't want to go in a house. And slowly, maybe it took 45 minutes, an hour or so, we started feeling better and went in the house and said, well, let's go ahead and go to the concert. We were still, my wife calls it the shaken baby syndrome. We kind of had that jarred sensation, for the rest of the night. And we said, we will never, ever go back out to that mausoleum again. We did go into another mausoleum, and we did have a little bit of experience there with the sudden lowering of temperature and orbs around us and that sort of thing. But that first one was a terrible experience, and I didn't like that at all. So.
Wow.
Well, you know what, Loren?
I'd be excited to do that again. So. Just not that place. Just not that place. I don't want to go back. So.
You know what, Loren? This has been such an amazing conversation, and we really do appreciate you coming on the show. So, what do you want to leave our listeners with in regards to your book, which is called Cops, True Stories of the Paranormal? Is there one thing that you want the readers to take away?
Well, there's definitely something out there. These officers who spend most of their working day dealing with the black and whites and working with evidence, and they find something that just doesn't fit into these normal parameters. There's definitely something out there. I've experienced it. The 17 writers in this book all have experienced something to some degree, and it's something we should all just continue to look into. Everyone's interested in what happens after we leave, check off this mortal coil, and move on, and maybe by all of us continuing to do research in this area, get a little hint of what happens.
Absolutely.
Well, you know what,
you guys are doing a
Loren,
great job.
Thank you.
Thank you again. You know what? Where can our listeners go to learn more about you and to check out this book and the other amazing books that you've written?
Well, I'm on Amazon, Loren W. Christensen, or if they want signed books, we sell them out of our website at www.lwcbooks.com. It's my initials, lwcbooks.com.
Excellent. Well, you know what, Loren? Thank you again. And, we really would love to have you back on the show.
Great. Yeah, absolutely, Loren. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your experiences in your book, your amazing book, Cops' True Stories of the Paranormal. Go out and get it. We'll actually put your link on our website, on our Facebook page, and share this great knowledge with everyone. Thank you again, Loren, and we hope to have you back on the show again.
All right, sounds good. Thanks much.
Thank you.
Have
a great weekend.
Okay, bye-bye.
There you have it, Loren Christensen. Amazing guy.
That was great.
I have a question for you. What attracted you to invite Loren to come on the show?
It was the book. It was the title. Like you said, I had been noticing, there had been some articles that I found, nurses' experiences with the paranormal. There was one, I think, that we posted a while back, firemen's experiences. And this was, really the first time that I really saw a book. We've talked to law enforcement, in regards to the paranormal, but this was the first time I really saw a book that was dedicated to it. And then again, like I said, I looked at the rest of the books that he had. And he really is an amazing writer. He's got tons of stuff. It goes from self-defense to martial arts to even theory, different things, not dealing with the paranormal. And then all of a sudden, you have this one book, and it's Cops' True Stories of the Paranormal. That, in addition to, I have a lot of friends who are in law enforcement. And one of the things that knowing these people, they would never, ever, the people that I know would never, ever admit to something like this. They never would. So when I saw this title, I was like, I really want to read this. So I did read the book, and it just was, I could not put it down because there's so many things in the book, so many things in the experience that these people relate, that being an investigator, that you and I and anybody else that's gone investigating, you will identify with a lot of the things that happen to them. But I think we take for granted law enforcement in general. It's kind of like sometimes they really get a bad rap. And they're people. They're just like us. They have families. They have dreams. They have hopes and all of this. And I've always wondered about it. With what they deal with a lot of death. They deal with a lot of negative things, and I've always wondered about that. There's got to be something that happens. When you hear about hospitals, you hear about nurses and the things that they experience, people that experience things in hospitals where you have death. There's got to be something that's happening to the law enforcement that are right there at the time. So that's why I really, really wanted to talk to them.
Well, it's interesting because for me, the show was interesting because, like I had mentioned earlier, and speaking to Loren, that we had interviewed Frank Mara, who wrote about the 9/11 hallowed grounds, the Staten Island landfill area where many of the vehicles and debris from 9/11 had gone to, and the one revealing piece from that book was the experiences that a few, I can't remember the number, it was more than 3, I think, that experienced this sort of almost Florence Nightingale type of spirit that, and on, I think it was a couple of different occasions to different witnesses of this woman dressed in a, sort of Salvation Army uniform, seemingly trying to, not sure if help the fellow police officers or help the victims that may have been lingering around the debris into the other side. And I remember talking to Frank Mara, and he's saying that he was surprised that many of the fellow officers came forward and talked about it. And he didn't think that anything like that, would ever come to light or would ever be discussed because of, the whole uniform thing, the whole law enforcement. And, and I completely get that you don't want to be ridiculed or embarrassed, especially if you are someone of the uniform. That's something, you strive for. Your whole life and career in law enforcement is it goes for your reputation and your work ethics and your mind, and whenever I see a title just like Loren's book, I'm actually happy. I'm actually excited for it, and I'm interested to know what goes on in an officer's mind when they're revealing it. There's a lot of times when there are things that happen to me within the paranormal that I can't seem to figure out how to believe it or how to understand it to be real, but yet it did happen. And so as I'm explaining it a lot of times, either to myself or to other people, it's difficult to comprehend. It's difficult to put my hands around, to try and fathom this, experience of whatever it is. And so I can only imagine how that is, 1,000 times more difficult, or the feeling of that is 1,000 times much more intense coming from someone in law enforcement who, everything that they do in their career, and it, spills over into their personal lives, everything is based on evidence and hard evidence and true evidence, and that's the lead to go to. And in the paranormal, you can't honestly say that there is hard evidence yet. There's really, truly nothing that we can go on with other than personal experiences. To be 100% truthful, that's really the only thing that you can hold on to that's tangible, and that's only tangible to the person talking about the experience. So it really interests me to talk to someone of law enforcement and to hear of stories of men and women in uniform who have, while on the job, in the field, have experienced the paranormal, and yet don't know how to explain it, don't know how to record it on file, with that vanishing man right in front of them. How do you go to your sergeant? How do you go to your chief and say, hey, they didn't run away, no, they didn't escape, they didn't, shoot at us and then run off, they just out of thin air. And so to cope with that and to deal with that, it's interesting to me. It's not, as a normal experience, as you were talking about before, as, someone working in McDonald's or working in the post office or, something like that, where it can be freely talked about or discussed amongst peers. It's a whole different world in law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, this job is based on fact. This job is based on finding the answers to what happened in a particular situation. So here you have a mindset where, like he says, evidence is everything. There is no true evidence. There's nothing that you can only say that, yeah, we were chasing this guy and he ran through a wall. How does that sound? How do you go back to your sergeant and say, hey, we had him, boom. And then again, too, like he mentioned and like Seth mentioned, they're told not to say anything. So here's an experience that this person they've seen it, they've gone through it, but yet you're being told, no, don't say anything about it. That's got to be horrible. I mean, to me, I think it would eat at me not to be able to say it, not be able to share it. Not that I want anybody to believe it, because I do believe that, until you experience something, you're most likely not going to believe it. But here we have something that has happened to these people. They've gone through it, but yet they're told, no, don't say anything about it. And one thing I really think is good, I'm glad he did something like this, because now you have, obviously this isn't something that's happening just here and there. He had enough stories in that book, enough people came to him. It's happening. This is something that is really happening to them, but there's never been an outlet for it. There's never been some place to put it. You can't put it in the police report. So I like what he's doing. I like this book. I liked it. I don't know, the title, when I saw it, it just clicked, and I wanted to read it. And after I read it, I did want to speak with him.
One of the points in the interview with Loren that I love when I talk to people either on air or off air. I'm sort of a highly visual person. I tend to be able to see. I can see if someone's trying to explain something. I can pretty much have a well-deformed vision of what they're trying to convey. Or if I'm reading a book, I can really visualize the setting, the scenes, the characters, and what's happening in the action, sort of creating the television in your own head. Within my work and my day job, there are things that I have to visualize to, I have to plan for the worst, and so I have to visualize all the different scenarios that could happen and pre-plan for them in advance. And so I work through it. And I have all of these stories that run through, and that's how I jot down my plan of action for a lot of things. And so when Loren was explaining and talking about the white supremacist prisoner that set fire to McDonald's, and the question was talking about, what was the most frightening thing that he had ever really experienced, and whether or not there is such thing as evil because of what humans do to other humans. And when he was talking about this white supremacist and how the evil and the demonic, if you want to call it that, just the pure evil that was palpitating in that room and what he felt and could feel it, not necessarily meaning that visually this person was, 6'9" and 500 pounds of muscle and all this other stuff, which you would typically think of being fearful of a person. The fear from the eyes, the fear that permeated throughout this white supremacist body through the plexiglass, as he was talking about, I could see it. I could almost feel it. That goes to what a great author and a great writer Loren is, that he's able to express that and share that feeling and that emotion in someone else by just words. But as he was talking, I was starting to sense that feeling that of that evilness as he was talking about, and sort of correlating it to some experiences that I've had and felt, that pure evilness, that pure demonic feeling, both within the paranormal and outside the paranormal, dealing with certain people. I truly appreciated his perception of it and his description of it. And I think not many people think along the lines that Loren does in regards to the question about whether or not there's evil. When you pose that question to him, 9 times out of 10, people would normally think visually you have to see something and describe it as evil. Or an action that is happening is described as evil, somebody getting hit, scratched. I'm talking about in the paranormal now. That's sort of evil. But rarely do you hear people talking about the emotional or the feelings of it. Yes, people talk and say, it doesn't feel right. It feels heavy in here, so it must be demonic. But when the experience happens, it's more so on the visual side of it. And so it was sort of refreshing to hear him describe it in a way that it's more of an emotion. It's more of a non-tangible type of thing that is felt than something that is visually intangible in front of your face. And so I just wanted to share that because that's something when he was talking really struck me a little bit more than a lot of times when we do talk to people about things and describing things. So I'm sure many people who heard that as well, if you want to go back and listen to it, you're more than welcome to, and just hear that again and maybe even close your eyes and try and visualize it yourself, what that scenario was like, and that feeling again, because it's palpitating. It's almost tangible. It's almost real that you can reach out and touch it.
Yeah, and I felt that feeling, and it's different when you feel it. You know it. I mean, it's not something, like we've gone to locations where people say, "Oh, it's negative" and stuff like that, and I've never felt it. But there was one location where I did feel something like that, and it was the one time that I've said, "I don't like this place." And so reading his stories just kind of like confirmed for me that other people can feel this. The story that he talked about with the dog, when you're reading these stories, he's such a good writer that it puts you in that spot. And these aren't just like little, somebody had posted on our page that they had read another book a couple of years ago, and it was like, it ended up being like heartwarming stories. These are not heartwarming stories. These are really what I would call experiences. And the only reason why I say that is because of my own personal experience with things in the paranormal. Like I said, reading the book, there were things that I could identify with. There are things that I could say, yeah, that's right, and I still give them all the credit in the world for doing what they do. Here you go, you're dealing with, not exactly the best part of society, and then now you're adding in these other experiences with something that isn't tangible. It's not a real person that you can touch. It may appear to be there, but you can't touch it, you can't grab it, so this is something that I'm really amazed, and like I said, I give law enforcement all the credit in the world because of what they deal with. And this is just another aspect that I kind of always suspected was there, but I'm really glad that I read this book.
Well, the sort of basis, for tonight's show was talking to someone who was within law enforcement and wrote about law enforcement experiences in the paranormal directly from men and women in uniform. And the idea was, is it more believable? Is the paranormal more believable from an outsider when the story is coming from someone of a rank, of a person in uniform? We've heard many stories from people within the government, within the astronauts talking about this. People who have these high-level positions that you would normally think are obviously well-educated and well-versed in life and in what things are wrong and right. And so it got me to thinking, not so much harping on the idea of people in uniform and whether or not it's more believable than someone who works at McDonald's or works at an office job or whatever. It's more in general. And so I had, I'm sure people have seen this before, but in 2011, there was a Gallup poll that was done on what, I don't know if this was done in America only. It is, the United States. And so what's the sort of general consensus of feelings towards the paranormal? How many percentage of folks out there believe in certain elements within the paranormal? And and I've seen this before, and I'm sure, Lucy, you have seen it, and everybody who's listening right now probably have seen either this poll or probably another one. And it depicts that 71% have had a paranormal experience, but 56% believe ghosts and spirits are of the dead. I'm not sure what they think that it is. Either it's of another dimension, or that it's a demon, or just a hallucination. And they give percentages for that, which is pretty interesting. On the same Gallup poll, it says that 37% believe that houses can be haunted. 65% believe Ouija boards are dangerous, which we know that to be, the consensus a lot of people have. But what was interesting in this Gallup poll, and I'm not sure how to make sense out of it, they go into other findings, and they bring up psychics, if people are possessed by the devil, witches, reincarnation, and channeling. And they talk about, and they show you in this statistic here, what percentage to believe in or are not sure of or don't believe in at all. What was interesting, though, is that, I'll just read down the list here. It says psychics are spiritual healers or the power of the human mind to heal the body. 55% believe in it, 75% said they're not sure, and 26% say they don't believe in it. Then you go to the people on this earth are sometimes possessed by the devil. 42% believe in it, and 44% don't believe it. So it's sort of split 50-50 almost. Mm-hmm. There's 13% that are not sure. The next one is that people can communicate mentally with someone who has died. I'm not sure what that means mentally, but in any case, 21% believe in that. 55% don't believe in that we cannot communicate with the dead, which is strange because if 71% have had a paranormal experience and 56% believe that ghosts are the spirits of the dead, why is it that 55% only believe that we can communicate with them? What was even more interesting and mind-boggling to me was the title of witches, that 21% believe in the idea of witches and 66% don't believe in it at all. But reincarnation is higher in percentage. I'm not sure. It's kind of weird, and I don't know if it has to do with the education of people on what these different elements and what these different areas of the paranormal are, to understand what it is. I mean, it's very strange, and I don't know what to make of it, and I don't know how even they received this information, how this Gallup poll was received, and who they actually interviewed on this. But it's very weird and very strange how, and we talked about this before, how how is it that you can believe in one thing and not the other, mm-hmm. or that you tend to negate one thing, not so much believing in one thing, but negate one thing, saying no, that cannot happen at all, but yet another thing in the paranormal can. It's kind of opening your mind and then closing it right away, almost. So to me, it just doesn't make sense. And so this conversation tonight and doing the research and reading the book and everything, I wanted to go back in and check on the statistics that was done, because we were talking about whether or not people tend to believe more paranormal stories coming from people of law enforcement as opposed to others. And I still don't know what to make of, of society or of these people that, or of these people that are creating these Gallup polls. Is it to sway us in a way? Is it to make people who are not in this field and in this community make us think that we're just nuts? I don't know. I just figured I'd share that.
no, but pretty much, in defense of witches, okay? What I'm going to say is that I think most people have had this things from stories and fairy tales and the media,
and Hollywood.
And Hollywood.
Right.
They believe that witches, the long nose and the hat and the cauldron, okay? That's the perception that I think a majority of people have. They've ever truly understood what a witch really is. And a witch isn't, the crone. It isn't, it's not the person from the fairy tales, okay? A witch, okay, in Native American culture you have medicine men, medicine women, who technically, because they work with nature and because they work with the earth and that, they could be, if you go to the definition of witch, they could be called that. There are people that do believe in the forces of the earth and the air and nature, but they're classified as witches, but they're not. They're believers in something else. So I think, again, media and stories and everything that we've been taught really do make us think in certain terms, okay? I think, okay, now getting back to the other question that you had, that I had about, is it more believable that a police officer is telling me this story? Yeah, to me it is, because all of my experiences so far in talking to police, to law enforcement, they're told not to say anything. This is a person who, on the job, if this is something that's happening on the job, they are instructed not to say anything. So for them to come forth and say something, no one is going to jeopardize their reputation, their job, to make up a story. That's highly unlikely. I personally don't believe someone will do that. So if someone in law enforcement is going to tell me a story about the paranormal, I'm going to tend to believe them only because of the circumstances of their job. They're told not to believe in this. They're told not to repeat it. And I truly believe that they are not going to damage their own reputation. They have to maintain some kind of believability. They have to maintain a certain standard, if you want to say it. That's why I would tend to believe them. Now, someone who works, in McDonald's, they, and we've seen this, go on any social media site and everybody's got, oh yeah, I saw this and I've got this story and this happened to me. And unfortunately, as we've learned, a lot of times it's just for attention. People know that everyone wants to hear a good ghost story and everybody wants to hear about this. And, go back to the Ouija board, okay? Everybody's got a story, I know about this and this happened. I've yet to speak to someone where they had a really bad experience with a Ouija board. It's always a story that someone's heard from someone else. It's always something that they're relaying from someone else. My own personal experience with the Ouija board, I haven't found that proof that it is negative. I mean, we've talked about this before. Why? It's a tool. It's simply a tool, just like a digital recorder, just like a spirit box. Why isn't, if a Ouija board can bring across something negative, why can't the spirit box? Basically, same idea, two different mediums, but, and then again, how do we know it's not our own subconscious moving that planchette? So I think we have so much stuff thrown at us, through media, through books, through stories, through television, that we tend, the majority of people tend to believe what's being thrown at them rather than go out and research and find out for themselves. And I don't want to generalize, because I know people in our community, in the paranormal community, we're looking for the answers. We're going to go and search for something. If we hear something or, we see something, we're going to try to research it and we're going to try to find that truth. But I think those that are not involved in the paranormal, where's the first place you're going to go? Oh, I'm going to go what I see on TV. Oh, this show showed me this. So that's what, that's the truth. I saw it on TV. Then you've got the other group that, oh, wait a minute, it's on Facebook, so it's real. If it's on the internet, it's real. So, where do you make that distinction? Where, how do you fix those wrongs?
Well, there are people who get into the paranormal that do it for a hobby only, do it for fun, do it for passing the time, do it for wanting to experience something, whether it be just once or a few times. But to be fair and to be honest, I just want to back up and talk about what you just mentioned, that not everybody who works in McDonald's or Best Buy or an office job are just out there sharing stories of the paranormal just to get attention. They're not all like that.
No, they're not.
There are many believable stories of folks who are not in law enforcement that are truly, some frightening, some beautifully miraculous experiences that happen, and they are not in law enforcement. But I think, the basic foundation that we were talking about tonight is that the embedment of ethics, the embedment of morals that is instilled in someone who is in the military or who is of the uniform, who has been taught rigorously and who has experienced things, they've experienced life at their worst, tend to be more believable because there's nothing to gain. There's actually more to lose by revealing stories and experiences like this. And therefore, that's the reason why it is more believable. If you hear a story from an astronaut or from someone, high level in Congress or in the government or, an ambassador in another country or any one of those high levels, they're told, even, as you mentioned, that even if there is anything of that nature, you don't express it, you don't say it, you don't share it, because it demeans you as the person and the high role that you have, but it also demeans what you are representing, what institution and organization you're representing. So obviously, that they don't want that to come out. One of the funny things, though, I wanted to talk about just briefly was when Loren was talking about how he and his wife were doing their, I guess, initial paranormal investigations in preparation for this book and the book before that was going to be written but ended up not being, was to investigate cemeteries. And I find that a little funny, not funny, demeaning funny, but I find it funny that the first thing people think about to go to be able to speak to spirits is a cemetery. And I understand the mindset of someone who has not been in the field to think that, if you're a burglar, you're going to go to a bank to rob because that's the best place to go. But it doesn't necessarily relate to the paranormal field because, as we all know, spirits and ghosts don't have designated silos or designated rooms or designated locations in the world that they only stay at. You can be in your own living room and pop open a recorder and have a conversation with anybody that passes by. So it's just funny that I hear it from other people who are actually in the field who do this and continually go to cemeteries to try and speak with spirits. I get it. You're more likely to get a response or get an activity or an experience. But it's funny that people think that that's the first place you go to. Almost like a sure shot way of getting something is to go to a cemetery.
Well, I like how he said it. Like the burglar goes, that's where the money is, so let's go where the dead people are.
Right.
But what I did like that he mentioned a couple times was Gettysburg.
Another one that brought up Gettysburg.
I have told you over and over again that this place is amazing. Just what's there, we've always talked about this, that the land remembers. And this is the perfect place because there is so much that is still there. I didn't know about that, that the sounds of gunshot, the sounds of warfare, have diminished. But there's still so much that's there. And then you can feel it, just walking across this. So this goes back to where places where trauma has happened. He talked about closed up prisons. Well, every time we've gone to Eastern State Penitentiary, they're there. I mean, they're definitely there. Why do they remain? Who knows? They have their own reasons, but they're still there. So I do believe that, places of trauma, hospitals, emergency rooms. I can't imagine what people experience in an emergency room. It's always busy. There's always something going on, at least if you're in Chicago. There's always something going on in an emergency room. But what kind of energy is still there? It's got to be, there's got to be something there. There has to be. We've gone to mental asylums and we've felt things there. We've never really done a hospital, which I would be very interested in investigating a hospital because I want to see what remains, what happens there. I also did find it interesting that he did mention that in the book, that about a woman not going to have a baby in a hospital because of all the things that are there. And I never really thought about that. I have one child. I had him in a hospital. And that never crossed my mind. It never did. And I think just the whole miracle of childbirth, the whole miracle of bringing a child in, I kind of think that maybe that might overcome any negative that's around, but I'm not going to say that it's not there. I see his point, but I don't know, like I says, there's so many things, like I says, the paranormal, there's so many things we don't know. And the more we talk to people, the more we share experiences, the more we learn, and the more we find something that maybe we never thought about before. And this is I've always said it, this is where we're going to get our answers, is from personal experience, but also listening to other people's experiences. What they've experienced may help you understand something that you've experienced but wasn't really sure about. So I think this was a good conversation. This was an excellent conversation.
Well, just to touch on your bringing up hospitals, that was one of the things that stood out for me was the words that were written in the book about how a mother should think about when when giving birth in a hospital. It's basically a place where people die and people are sick, and that energy is, we've all experienced it. Maybe not, and you may be lucky, but we've all been in the hospital, and 9 times out of 10 people say you recover better when you go home and not in a hospital, because the feeling that's the depressed I can't speak tonight. I don't know what is wrong with me. The depressive feeling that you have is doing the opposite of helping your body recover. They always say laughter is the best medicine, and so feeling that happy and joy actually produces metabolism and cells in your body to regenerate and help fight off, infections or things like of that nature. And so hospitals tend to bring you down a bit because you don't want to be there. And so naturally when you go home, you usually recover a lot quicker than you would in a hospital. But anyway, that line in the book and that discussion about, should the hospital be purified before newborns are brought in there so that energy is released somehow and does not, whatever is lingering or is residual, does not affect the newborn or that new life that has been brought into the world. And that got me to think about that a little bit, because it was a statement that I've never heard before or that was ever discussed in that manner about hospitals. And, when we talk about hospitals and we describe them, and if we talk about the paranormal, as you were just talking about, Lucy, about how, there is negative energy there is that residual energy that, because of the death and because of the sickness of the individual, but also, too, and why I think that there may be residuals at the hospital is because of not only the patient that's there, but also the family members that come to visit. There is such emotions that come over the family members that are just as strong or even stronger than the emotions of the actual sick person that is in the bed or the dying person that is in the bed. And the emotions that are shared and spread in hospitals, just like, a disease is spread, these emotions are spread as well amongst that hospital. And it got me to thinking about not so much thought forms, that the anguish and the trauma and the suffering, again, not only of the patient, but of the family members that are there, that energy is feeding the spiritual residual energies that are there constantly, and either could be creating more or inviting more. It's, I don't want to say it's, hospitals are vortexes or something like that, because I don't know what vortexes are really. No, I don't think anybody really knows. But, is it a magnet because of the continual trauma, the continual energies that are created, again, not just of the patients, but also from the family members, which is, I think, sometimes in some cases even stronger, that energy is encapsulated in that location, in that building, that is possibly even stronger than the spirit that is lingering that has just passed away. And creating this just continual factory of spirit contact and the spirits not wanting to leave. And sometimes I've even heard in certain cases where the spirits don't want to leave because they feel comfortable and comforted by the emotions that have been lingering in a certain location that has been perpetuated by the living. And it's almost like a continual spoon feeding of medicine or, continual laying of blankets over and over again on a quote-unquote spirit. It's that comforting feeling. And so is that the attraction that is happening? And so you've got that going on. And with Gettysburg, it's almost the same thing. When we go, or when people go, visitors go, tourists go to Gettysburg, you're in essence replaying what happened on those fields. And, I can guarantee you that most of the people that visit these certain locations, like Gettysburg, have those emotions over again or are feeling those emotions. Because when you have a tour guide telling you how many people died on that field, you have to be cold as ice not to feel anything at all in there. And so those emotions are stirred again. And again, it creates that energy in that area, in that location, and could ball up to, and as Loren was talking about before, that yes, it dissipated in the early 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s, that residual, cannon bombing and cries for help and all that other stuff. But he did say that it comes back again and then dissipates and then comes back again and dissipates. Is that because of the energies that we are feeding it with our emotions that is drawing it back up again? Or could it be that those energies that we are thinking about is creating the thought form of it? And so that started to make me think about all of this. It's kind of weird, and it's kind of a morbid tangent for me to go off of after reading that. This is how my mind works. This is welcome to Anthony's world, because that's how my brain works when I start to think of things. But it was really interesting, and I think that's why I loved Loren's book, and I loved him as a person, as a writer, because he got me to think that way. And not many people, for me, not many people have succeeded in that, in the paranormal, and he did that for me, and so I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I agree with you to a point. I think maybe because I think the living do kind of perpetuate a lot of the emotions, but I have to draw on some of my own experiences too. I agree with the hospital, but I've also had experiencing nursing someone until they passed in their own home. And what I noticed about the energy there, we had the family there, and the family, of course, is we all knew that the end was going to come, and of course there's the sadness and all of that, but it's kind of hard to explain, because as the time came closer to the end, I felt a sense of peace, and it was really hard to explain. The person had mentioned that they kept seeing, people from their past, that they were there in the room, and I remember that. And I remember at one point, just right before the end, there was like a sense of peace, almost like an acceptance, almost like, okay, I'm ready. That was really something I'd never felt before. Now, I've only been in the hospital twice, once to have a baby and once to have my appendix out. I don't remember feeling anything negative. And in fact, when I was in the hospital for my appendix, it was like a vacation. I mean, I didn't have to worry about anything. I was just, and they were giving me drugs. I mean, it was a great time, But it was like, I don't know. Now, I will say that, yes, I've spent
I just want to interrupt you for a second. I don't want you to think, and I don't know if I miscommunicated, it's not negative energy that I'm talking about as being left in there and affecting, or I don't think that's what Loren is talking about as far as affecting newborns. I think it's more along the lines of, if you died in a hospital, God forbid, and you lingered there, the idea is of you affecting that newborn, meaning you are actually interacting or could possibly attaching yourself to that newborn and going back to that home of that family and being around that child for a certain amount of years. I think that's the effect. The effect that is being talked about. Not so much negative, not so much darkness. I think is what Loren was talking about and what I was trying to explain about. So I don't want you to get confused as far as, when you were talking about not feeling anything negative or anything like that. It's not meant, I wasn't meaning that. I was just meaning affecting a spirit, just affecting another human being. They could be doing nothing or they could be conversating. That conversation between a child and a spirit is going to affect that child. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be negative in any way. It just means that there's an effect, a cause and effect that is happening, with that other human being.
See, I see what you're saying, but in my mind, I don't always see that as a negative.
That's what I'm saying. It's not negative.
Yeah, it's not a negative. So I'm not understanding the idea of purifying, clearing it.
Releasing.
It's the same.
Okay. It's the same as sort of cleansing and releasing, a home. not necessarily meaning that any spirits that are there are negative in any way, but you are just hand-holding them to cross over to the other side and to either walk into another dimension or walk somewhere else in their path of the afterlife, and not necessarily have to linger around. Either it was their cause of death or their place of death, whatever it is, to continually relive that over and over again. And so that's what I'm talking about, is purifying the hospital so that that patient doesn't have to continually remind themselves that they died in that place, that they had that disease, or that they were shot, or that they were whatever it was that caused their death, to move on and accept their death, basically.
That's something I don't ever see happening. I don't ever see a hospital agreeing to anything like that. And, you know, you have a newborn. They can come in contact with the spirit, I believe, at any time, whether it be the hospital, whether it be, you know, on the way home. I mean, because like you said, there's no set spot where spirits are supposed to be. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. So I do believe that, you know, maybe there may be more in a hospital, but I also believe that they're everywhere. So this contact, or however you want to put it, is there. You know, it's everywhere. It's kind of like you can't put your baby in a bubble, you know, and every mother on this earth would love to put their child in a bubble, but you can't. That's one thing that you can't. That's one hard fact as a mother you learn. You cannot put your child in a bubble. You cannot protect them from everything. You can teach them, but how do you teach a newborn? A newborn will not understand what you're trying to get to it. Sure, when they get older, you can bring it forth, and you can, you know, teach them so that they're not so afraid of it, or that maybe they have some kind of understanding, or maybe they'll look at you and say, hey, you know what, Ma, you're crazy. You know, which has happened to me. My son tolerates what I do, okay? He doesn't necessarily believe it. But what was interesting was he picked up the spirit box, and he says, oh, is this what you guys use when you do the sessions? And I said, yeah. And he goes, so what happens? So I turned it on. I turned it on with him standing there. And this was here in my room in front of the computer, like I'm always, you know. And I turned it on, and I said, hello, is there anybody there? And we got an answer. We got hello. And he looked at me, and he says, oh, okay, and walked away. So, I mean, you know, it can happen anywhere. And it doesn't mean that it's negative. It doesn't mean, you know, but I think, yeah, you know, having a newborn, that contact can happen anywhere, not just in the hospital.
No, sure. It goes back to what I was just talking about before, how people think, you know, the need to go to a cemetery the first time that they want to, you know, experience a paranormal investigation. You know, there's, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's kind of funny to think that you need to go to a cemetery in order for that to happen. You know, it doesn't. Just because there may be more souls and more spirits there, you know, the likelihood or the chances of you getting a contact or communication obviously is going to be greater, but the experience doesn't necessarily have to happen there. It doesn't have to happen in a haunted location. It doesn't have to, you know, or a quote-unquote supposed haunted location. You could be in a store. You could be in a cafe. You know, there's, and that's why, you know, we've always talked about, this is my love of this whole thing, is I love history. And so, you know, researching land and areas, not necessarily the brick and mortar of the place that you're going to, will give you an insight as to what could be lingering in an area or a particular place. And so you could be in Starbucks, but the Starbucks may have been built on a land that, you know, once was an insane asylum, once was a Native American burial ground, once was a torture place for prisoners, or anything in colonial times, in 1600s, whatever, anything. You know, it's not so much the actual structure itself. It's the land, it's the energy, it's the area around the space that can create it. And so, it's something to think about, and it's something to bring up and discuss, and that's why we did. That's why we did it tonight.
Well, all in all, I really enjoyed this conversation. I really enjoyed this book, and if you get a chance, you have to pick the book up and at least read it. It'll give you a slightly different perspective. I think Loren is he's a brilliant writer, and his words will make you really picture, almost experience what is being told to you in the story.
Right. And there's talk about, or we were just talking about how in chat room about cemeteries and all that such. Lucy and I have never investigated in a cemetery. I personally think a cemetery, in my opinion, tends to be sort of off limits. I tend to think it's their place of rest, if anything. If they're lingering around there, then it's their place of rest, or it's their sanctuary that they go back to if they are traveling back and forth to different places here with the living. That's personally my opinion, but I know other people think otherwise, and I'm not going to judge people at all, but it's just not in my genre of areas to investigate or speak to.
Well, for me, it's just out of respect. I mean, I know how sacred Native American burial grounds are, and I know how they've been defiled and just raised and buildings built over it. It's the same thing with the cemetery. I mean, this is out of respect. This is this person's last resting place. So to go in and investigate for me would be wrong. I just couldn't do it out of respect for them.
Well, I'm not going to get into it because we only got about 8 minutes left. But as we were just talking, as you were just talking, and I was thinking, again, this is my morbid brain. Welcome to my world, everybody. We go to cemeteries to talk to our loved ones. We go to the grave and we say, hi, Mom, hi, Dad, hi, Grandma, or whoever, and we have conversations. Is that different than someone who goes there to paranormal investigate and question the souls there?
I think it is. I think it's communication between you and your loved one. Now, personally, I don't go to the cemetery to talk to my loved ones because I believe that I can talk to them anytime. I think, I have a Native American belief that my loved ones are always with me. I know they're always with me. But I think it's different when a family goes to the cemetery, to talk to their loved ones. That's different. It's the intent. The intent is different. When someone goes to investigate, most likely you don't have a personal connection to whoever's in that cemetery. But if you're going there for your family member, you do have that personal connection. So there is a difference, I think.
I'm not asking for opinions or anything. I just thought it would be, a great question to bring up and for people to think about. And, talks amongst, if you've got paranormal groups or whoever, bring it up and ask the question, is there a difference between going to the cemetery as you normally would to talk to your loved one that has passed on and be at their gravesite than as opposed to a person who goes to that cemetery that does not have a loved one that's buried there but still wants to have a conversation. And it could be respectfully done. I'm not saying that someone's going to go there and, pound on the tombstones and say and demand an answer back. But, there are people that go there with the intention, with a good intention of wanting to speak to anybody that is willing to talk. I don't think that's harmful. But I think there's a debate, I think, there between the ideas of going to a cemetery to speak to someone who is not your loved one as opposed to someone who is your loved one is there.
Which I will admit I've done once in New Orleans, St. Louis Cemetery, number 1. I've gone there, and I wanted to pay my respects to Marie Laveau. So I did go there, but I didn't bring a whole bunch of equipment or anything like that. It wasn't a big investigation. I just wanted to go and pay my respects. So if she was willing to communicate with me or anybody that was there, I was grateful for that. And I think my intent was different. It wasn't to go investigate.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm not judging. I'm not judging anybody, and I'm not saying anything. I'm just bringing up the conversation. That's all I'm doing. I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. What the heck do I know? I'm not an expert in the field, and I don't know what spirits say, behind closed doors in the afterlife, whether or not they like us to go into the cemetery or not. I'm just bringing up the conversation for folks to think about, and maybe it's a conversation that you have over a beer or a cup of coffee with friends, and discuss it. You never know where you're going to end up in the conversations within the paranormal if you don't discuss anything and everything. And so you don't want to leave any stone unturned or anything out there that could lead you in another direction while trying to investigate and while trying to, strive for the answers that each of us are trying to strive for personally within the paranormal. So I leave it out there for everybody else. I'm sorry to have gone off on a tangent.
If you go to a cemetery and they don't like it, I got a feeling that they're going to let you know one way or another.
I'm sure too. I know.
Okay.
All right, so we've got about 4 minutes left. Again, thank you, Loren Christensen, and we will be posting his links to his Amazon site for his book and for his website, lwcbooks.com, to check that out. Thank you, Loren, for coming on the show. And Lucy, why don't you get to the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week?
Okay, this week our Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week is Teresa Roberts of Corydon, Indiana. She likes the Zac Brown Band, Travis Tritt, American Horror Story Hotel, True Blood, Jägermeister, Betty White, and of course she likes Paranormal Review Radio. Teresa's been liking our posts on Facebook. Thank you so much, Teresa, for following us, and congratulations. And by the way, I love that picture.
Of course, Lucy would like that picture. You'll know the picture once you see it on our Facebook page. A great picture, Teresa. And congratulations. You are now a part of the PRR family. And don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, all you got to do is just like us on Facebook or subscribe to us here on YouTube.
Well, the paranormal is really becoming the normal. Is it because the veil is becoming thinner, or are we just becoming more aware of the other side? This was a really great conversation about another connection to the other side. We want to thank Loren for sharing these stories with us, and we'd like to thank all of the brave men and women who are a part of law enforcement. Thank you all for your service, and God bless you all. So, since last week our show was so overwhelmingly popular, we have decided to continue the list and add a few more. And I'm talking about scary facts you don't want to know. We didn't get a chance to finish our list of scary facts last week. So next week we're going to finish the list and we're going to add a few more. So some of these new facts may shock you to the core, so you will have to listen to this show twice in order to get the stories to sink in. Tell your friends and call Grandma. You don't want to miss this one. Thank you, everyone, for spending time with us. Every week our family grows, and we are so grateful for your love and support. Thank you, Anthony, for being the brains of the operation. So, until next week, Parapeeps, keep listening to your spidey senses and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio.